Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Journeys to Belonging. I'm very excited about today's guest. Kate Leeming is an explorer and an adventurer and has cycled the distance greater than twice around the world at the Equator, which is really amazing to think about. I found out about Kate several years ago and was hoping to bring her to Kuwait. That never happened. Oh, well, it didn't happen yet. Maybe it'll happen someday. But her work bringing education to the most vulnerable around the world through her cycling is just so inspiring to me, and I believe will be to all my listeners. I'm amazed at what she does. Kate, welcome to Journeys to Belonging.
Thank you, Aline. It's lovely to, well, not quite be there, but certainly be with you tonight. So well, it's tonight here. It's not tonight there, I don't think.
Well, it's still this afternoon here, but yeah, so people are probably wondering, where in the world is she? So please tell us more. I didn't really talk about any details in terms of your bio. So tell us where you are and tell us the things that you're working on.
Right. Well, I'm in Melbourne, which has gone from the most livable city in the world to the most locked down city in the world. But we are just coming through all of that. And things are looking quite positive now. That's just all been, it's a bit boring actually, but we've got over the 80% vaccination rate, so that's double vax, so that's giving us a ticket to move on, so that's cool. Originally I come from Western Australia actually, so I grew up on a wheat and sheep farm about 130 kilometres east of Perth, you know what that is, and then went away to boarding school and university and actually did become a teacher, but I realised that when I went to start teaching, I did physical and health education, and I realised that actually the kids in the first school were teaching me more about life than I knew myself, because I'd really just gone straight through school and straight through uni and then back to school again. And I always wanted to travel. And so once I'd finished uni and worked for a year or so, I was a part of a group that organised a hockey tour of the UK. I went over there, but I'd always dreamed of cycling, but I didn't know what could be achieved on a bike at that stage, and I didn't have any confidence or anything like that, because I'd grown up in this little pocket of the world, and did a little trip in Ireland with a friend from that tour. But then I'd also started to plan something a bit bigger in Europe with some other friends. And then so that sort of was how I started to find my passion. And I just loved I did about 15,000 kilometers through Europe over the next couple of years as one bigger trip in particular. And that was just really where I found my passion for cycling. So it was, I just really loved the way, very connected with the people and the land. And I love the fact that just bringing a line on a map to life is, amazing, getting through a day and, traveling quite a distance and under my own steam, and then getting to the end of the day, it's very satisfying. Right. And then just gives a great sense of place and a perspective of how the world fits together. And in particular, that was Europe at that time. So that's kind of how the cycling bit started. So it's more that I explore by bike, I think. Not sort of, I don't kind of fit into I am a sports person, a professional sports person actually, but not at cycling. I use the cycling in a different way. Right. And so I kind of don't quite fit into the cycling sport side of things, even though I am pretty competitive as well. So, and then I met a fellow called Robert Swan, a polar explorer, UK, when I was in the UK, and he's like the first person in history to have walked to both the North and South Poles. And this was when I was at the same time planning my first sort of major expedition across Russia. And Robert taught me, and he helped me, he gave me a lot of confidence, and he taught me that there was much more value to what I was doing than simply riding a bike for myself. And that's where things started to change. And So I sort of turned that into a proper expedition. So I became the first woman to cycle from St. Petersburg to Vladivostok at a time when Russia was it just become a country actually.
Interesting.
So you and I had probably grown up with the Soviet Union as this sort of enemy sort of thing, and I lived on the other side of the world. And then there was the Chernobyl nuclear accident, and that was still all hushed up in Soviet times. Right. And then 7 years later, I'm planning to cycle with the breakdown of the CIS and into separate countries. And I'm about to cycle across the biggest country in the world, raising funds, aiding children affected by the Chernobyl disaster. So it's like, how does that work? But it was kind of amazing how that came to be, and how that all sort of came through. So that was the first big one. So it's, kilometers, 13,000, just under 13,500 kilometers. 8,304 miles. I know that because I was traveling with a British friend, Greg, who would always talk in miles and I would talk in kilometers. So,
oh, how fun.
So we sort of generally got, we just kept the distance on not the distance, but we just both spoke in different ways about it, but that was cool. I just think kilometers sounds like you're going further.
That's true.
And part of that, like there was like 1,500 kilometers of swamp in eastern Siberia where there were no roads marked on. So we had US Air Military maps that I'd found in the best map shop, I think, in the world in London. And, you couldn't get any other maps at all. And this was before you'd have any, GPS or anything like that. Right. So, we had to follow the railway line and then sometimes little forestry tracks or whatever. So there's no road signs or anything like that, and just working with locals, to get through. So that was right. An amazing experience.
I imagine so. Wow, how long did that take you? I mean, how long was that expedition?
Yeah, that was it was 5 months, 13. Okay. Yeah, so 5 months. In fact, we arrived a day ahead of schedule after 5 months, which is even more ridiculous. Oh gosh. I was sort of always trying to keep to my goals because we were restricted because of the seasons, and we weren't equipped for winter. There was lots of, the whole country was changing before our eyes.
What an adventure, and what a time to be there, and what a cause to have at that time. But when you feel it's right, it's right. You're going to do it. You went ahead and did it.
And I think if we hadn't left it, started on the 1st of May, we pretty much would have had to wait for another year. So it was pulled together amazingly quickly. And I had one of Robert Swan's sort of fellow polar explorers, who was an amazing Russian. He's a doctor, a thoracic surgeon. He was a Lenin medalist. And Robert was helping him convert to get set him up for his own business now that he was allowed to have a business. And with Misha Malakov, and so I worked with him, and I went over there before the start, about a month before the start of the journey. I'd met him when he'd come to London, and that was crazy because I'm 25 and I'm going across to the Soviet Union to this sort of Moscow airport, which looked like the KGB must have been anywhere around the corner.
Oh goodness! Wow.
Got two people standing there with my, with a sign up with my name on it. I sort of have to trust those people.
Yes.
Took us down, and then it was just a massive learning curve.
I bet. Yeah, especially since it was your first time. I mean, you had done these cycling expeditions, but nothing certainly like this, and with a purpose, and completely. I mean, I say the word foreign. And that is in capital letters, foreign territory at the time that you did. That's really amazing. Well, Kate, we're going to get into some of your other later work and so forth. So I'll ask my first question that I usually ask, but you've sort of alluded to it already a little bit in what you've said about your bio. I always ask my guests, if I say the word belonging or feeling a sense of belonging, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
I guess it's still my home and where I grew up, because I still think that's you know, in your formative years, that's what affects you most, and how you see the world. And then all these other things on top of that, actually, you know, I feel like I'm exploring to understand how the world fits together in this very grounded way. So belonging to our planet would be another way of thinking of it, that I'm gradually also pulling all these things in, all these different continents. And yeah, like, even though I've been living in Melbourne for a while, I still think that the West is still my home, and you know, families getting older, they're not all there anymore, but I still feel that's kind of still where my heart is. But I see the world entirely differently now, with all of the other experiences under my belt, and so it's kind of a privilege to look back at home and see what home was, and see my upbringing from a different perspective, from the good and, you know, things, and the positives, and things that were also, you know, would have been awesome if I had other opportunities as well at that stage. But overall, I realized I'm pretty lucky.
Yes, and so you sort of made those opportunities for yourself by, you know, exploring and being adventurous, and then offering that adventure to others. So you've talked a little bit already about where your passion for cycling comes, and I know you're a tennis pro rather than a cycling pro, but obviously there's a lot of training that's involved with cycling. But how did that passion for cycling and the idea about breaking the cycle education happen? So if you give us a little bit of background about breaking the cycle education, and how your trip through Siberia, or through that, you know, in those early years, how that affected what you did along the way, and yeah, just a little bit about your journey.
Yeah,
or a lot.
So each journey really changes me a little bit, as I mentioned, and actually, when you say tennis pro, it's actually real tennis, which is the original game of tennis. And that was my next adventure. Once I finished Russia, I went back to the UK, and then I was working at a health club there, and they had a real tennis court, which is, it's where all racket sports come from. It's an indoor sport. It's like a mixture between tennis, squash, and chess, with a lot more rules.
Oh, wow.
Where tennis comes from. And without spending the whole time explaining what that is, you know, it's the Grand Slam's just the same in 4 different countries. There isn't the same money though, and so my job. So after 2 years, I became a professional. I seemed to be one of the top women, and so I just wanted to see where that would take me as well. And I've always battled a knee injury at the same time, which I incurred early on in that sport. So although it seems totally different, in some ways they're related, because of, I guess, my approach. And over time, because I'm still a real tennis pro, one sort of helped the other in strange ways, actually, more in the mental side in particular. And so my job now, although I've been number 2 in the world, my job is pretty much like a golf club professional, where there's lots of very specialist things that I do, and looking after members, as well as, I don't compete very much because of my knee, unfortunately, but still that's a part of my life, and I get a lot of support from that community to help me with what I do on a bike as well. So that was just quick. So after 10 years, I did another journey, when you start to ask me about education. And this was to see how my own country matched up after having all of those other experiences. And so I organised the Great Australian Cycle Expedition, and that was about education for sustainable development. And the United Nations, UNESCO, took it on as one of the first, Australia's first official activity for their decade of education for sustainable development. And that was the first time I tried to it wasn't a very good education program, but I made an effort. First time I had a website, but all of those things. And during the journey, I was speaking to students in remote places as well. And as far as the education side, I kind of learned how I could do it better next time. But I could realize it was a time when like sustainability was still not really widely understood as a concept. It was kind of right at the start of that.
What year would that have been?
It was 2004. So the average person is what I'm talking about.
Absolutely, yes, yeah.
Didn't really understand about that. I don't think sustainability had entered the dictionary yet, even though obviously, it was obviously defined a long time before that.
Right.
But anyway, so that was kind of, looking at sustainability around Australia, as coming from a wheat and sheep farm myself, and understanding, most farmers actually do amazing work in terms of they have to be able to sustain themselves.
Right.
So often they, get a bad rap, but so many of them are just amazing at managing the land, and as business people, they actually have to manage it really well to make the most out of it. So,
right.
And that's something that growing up, it affected me a lot, because how my dad sort of farmed the land and things that he was trying to do to improve the productivity. So there's a lot of parts of that, and there was also the concept of me sustaining myself for 25,000 kilometers over 9.5 months, through 7,000 kilometers off road on very remote tracks, and part included the first crossing of the Canning stock route by a woman by bicycle. So that's got 1,000 sand dunes. So that was a big journey, and that was my first attempt. We are talking about education here. That was my first attempt to do something with education, and start to use what I'd studied a little bit, and starting to then bring that back into the value of my journeys. And then the breaking the cycle concept came with the next journey. And that was when I started looking at Africa and thinking, okay, look, I feel really passionate about the importance of education. And I was looking at a map showing levels of illiteracy, which was basically showing a lot of countries in most need of improved illiteracy, improved literacy, I should say, across the Sahel region through the base of the Sahara. And I was thinking, okay, now this could be a really great story, because if I cycle from the most westerly tip to the most easterly tip, and then also try to bring in this story, when I was firstly looking at education, but when I did the research, I realized that I had to look at not just the issues regarding education, but actually all of the causes and effects of extreme poverty, because they're all related in different ways. And this is a time when we're talking about the Millennium Development Goals. So I was looking at those, and I'd done masses of research before I started as well, with understanding what the main issues were. But then I didn't have any experience, and as we all know, learning by experience is the best way to learn. So the idea for breaking the cycle, firstly I was thinking, it was just a light bulb moment, because I was sitting here thinking, okay, we're talking about breaking the cycle of poverty, and then, okay, what I'm doing on a bike is pretty difficult, right? And so that's how that journey the expedition got the title of Breaking the Cycle in Africa. And so, yes, I did visit quite a few schools, but we also created an education program here with the Victorian Department of Education. So we were looking, it was quite groundbreaking, because there was nothing out there really even then. So that was really being made in 2009. There was just, a group of people from the education department were, putting together a program, which was very cool to know when I was cycling through these places and writing blogs and sending information back. And then I knew that children were learning from that, and really understanding a lot more about the real Africa, and not just the cherry-picked, usually negative stories that come through the media. And that's the story that I really wanted to tell, was the real Africa. And I'd seeded that journey I had 10 different partners. We had about 15 different projects during that 22,000 kilometers. So I was actually visiting each project during the journey. So I was having to not just cycle, but time everything with meeting up with different organizations.
Wow.
Which was pretty crazy to do, because I just knew that by cycling, yes, you get a grounded view of a place, but these issues were just way more complex than I would ever be able to pick up, or, you know, I knew that much that so by being able to seed my story with these other interactions really, it seemed like a good plan, which it worked to a T, actually. It's nothing's ever perfect, but I still managed to do what I said, which was to cycle from the most westerly tip to the most easterly tip of Africa, from Senegal to Somalia, to Cape Hafun in Somalia, which has not been done before. But at the same time, I was also meeting up with different, and just learning about say, the causes and effects of extreme poverty. So there's a story at the end of that I feel pretty proud of. And then after that, with the breaking the cycle education, I just decided to keep breaking the cycle because it seemed to work even if it wasn't to do with Africa. And so when I started to organize breaking the cycle South Pole, which is planning to make the first bicycle crossing across the Antarctic continent via the South Pole, I wanted to keep that breaking the cycle in there and start to use that with education. The actual logos and everything with breaking the cycle education itself didn't start till 2018. So I've been working on breaking the cycle South Pole for quite a while, getting skilled for the polar regions, because I'm good at the heat but not the cold. The heat's fine, I can do all sorts of heat, but so there's a whole different skill set that I needed to acquire, and it's pretty expensive when you have to go to Arctic regions and bring other people in on it as well. Right. So that's been a journey, just getting the skills and developing the bike, and it's the very first all-wheel drive fat bike in the world that was made. And I've been working with, all of this has educational value as well when I'm talking to kids.
Yes.
So there's been that journey. And then, say in 2018, I still hadn't found the funding. Well, the funding is the hardest part of these things, actually.
I bet it's not your favorite part either.
No, it's just I hate asking for funds, but so the only way I can do it is to really be really sure about what I'm doing and make sure that I have can prove that I'm going to be able to have decent materials at the end as well for them. Right. So it means that I'm not just a cyclist and someone who has to raise funds or gets a vision, but also at the other end of it, I have to be able to write, I have to be able to make films, I have to be able to present all of those things. And so I wasn't necessarily good at all those things, and I've slowly learned to get better at them. Yeah, sure, I'm good with a camera or whatever, but actually actually being filmed and presenting, that's taken a while to get better at.
Yeah, all a learning curve. Well, yeah. I know that the Africa expedition is on Beluga, right? For those who would like to go back and take a look at all the resources that you created and so forth.
So Beluga, the big African expedition wasn't on its own on Beluga, because Beluga wasn't even around then. Right. But then I met up with Evan, if you probably know Evan.
Right, Evan Schwartz.
Evan Schwartz. And so with Evan, firstly, I just gave them a whole lot of materials and they made some things. So I had nothing to do with making those lessons. And sometimes, it's kind of better when I control how the information is being used. But then I've also made some lessons I've done, which I'm very proud of. So 2 lesson series there. That one's called Exploration for Future Leaders. So it's really about the virtues of exploration and what is exploration and why is it important. And then also there's lessons on creating a global perspective and creating empathy. And so that's all in that. And so it starts off talking about some of the most sort of well-known explorers from different ages. So everything from Marco Polo to Sir Ernest Shackleton to, you know, some of the heroes right now with say Jane Goodall and Sylvia Earle, and then I was going further, some young Australian explorers as well. And so there was that. Then, you know, so it's quite. What's the best I can do? So it's sitting there. That's a pretty good resource. I think there's 8 lessons in that one, and then there's another one I've made called Dream Thinking, and sort of it's kind of using design thinking, but to plan your own project. So it starts with creating your vision from your values and your passions, and then it goes sort of right the way through the processes. How do you create a mission, and then how do you test that mission, and then go to the next stage and the next stage. So I think there's 11 lessons in that series, but it's for anyone who's wanting to design their own project, you know, getting children to design their own projects. I think we don't even have to do all of the lessons. I think there's some pretty useful, you know, things in there. And then that's go
ahead. I know that's really interesting. It's sort of a good segue to what I wanted to ask you next, which is, you know, in terms of the preparation, there's a lot of physical preparation that you need to do in terms of making sure that you're fit and all of that. There's also a lot of mental preparation, because you're not just doing regular explorations or adventures or expeditions. You're going to sort of what we would say extreme places, you know. I wouldn't call it extreme sports or anything like that, that really classifies it poorly, but yes, interesting places that people don't really know about. And so by following your adventures, we're able to learn more about the world. And I know that's what you're trying to do, but I would love for you to talk a bit about what does that preparation look like. And it seems like from the first adventure exploration you did until now, there's so many different things that you've learned. So touch on any of the things that you feel stand out in terms of your learning journey and learning the resilience, the mental and the physical, how you prepare yourself. You know, I'd love to know more, and I think my listeners would be interested also.
Yeah, because as I think I mentioned, like each journey, it changes me a little bit. So I couldn't have done the journey before that. So I couldn't plan the next journey without the journey before that, because it's kind of like, you know, I see the world slightly differently. So I guess the process is lots of research, and I have a very, you know, specific idea, because I love geography and I love the world, and I'm always looking and reading and thinking of ideas. But then, like, I spend a long time before I even tell anybody about a particular journey I'm going to do, in just creating the vision to make sure that it's something that's me and what I'm wanting to do. And, you know, there's usually a unique aspect to it, because it's got to be saleable, but also, so a lot of them, I think I've got 4 or 5 world first sort of thing, just because no one's done that before. But it's not, doesn't have to be that. It could be something else, but something very unique. So like they become like selling points as well as points of interest. So all of these things have to match up. So I spent a long time researching, putting that side together. Then I think, okay, then I start to make some inquiries in different places and just see, is this possible? And I look for the maximum first to see what's really out there, and then I kind of choose the path that I think is going to work. And then after that, I would, you know, sort of announce, and especially with my parents, you know, I sort of like, I don't tell them until I'm really sure, because they start to worry. So like, you know, yes. with the African,
and it doesn't matter how old you are.
No.
You're still their daughter. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So, but not just them, but all my friends too. They wanted,
sure.
they sort of would be worried. So they have to trust that I am putting processes in place to make things work.
Right.
You know, you don't get across Africa from the most westerly tip to the most easterly tip through 20 countries in a continuous line without having good security plans and networking, amazing networking and plans for each area that could be dodgy. So then I spend a lot of time on all of that, and then because by then, you know, I've got a plan that I need to be able to sell. I need to be able to sell it to find sponsors, obviously for the education side, obviously to actually have the energy to see this project right through to the other side of it as well. So, you know, but the other really important thing with getting that mission, that vision and mission right, is that when times do get tough, if I really believe in it and wholeheartedly believe in it, and it comes from me, and it comes from my passion, it comes from my vision and all of those things, then actually that's what breeds the resilience, I believe, because, you know, if you believe in that, there's always a way through. Then it's bloody mindedness trying to find sponsors, and it's, you know, we've all had issues with trying to find funds for different things in our lives, haven't we? Yes. And usually I'm just scraping the bottom of the barrel, just, you know, just trying to find just enough to make it happen. And, you know, I've got to be able to, each of those is like an investment from a sponsor, and I've got to make sure that I pull that off. As far as you ask about fitness, well, I'm always sort of working at fitness in particular, but when it comes to actually pulling these expeditions together, it's almost like anti-training. It's the opposite, because I am not getting any sleep. You know, I don't even have time much. So often fitness, yes, I've tested my knee and I've tested myself a little bit, but there's no point in overtraining, because if I'm going to be cycling for 10 months or 5 months or 3 months or whatever, I can just get fit as I go, as long as I know that my body can cope. And then I'll do like intensive sessions, say in the gym, where I'm doing lots of interval training, where I'm just pushing my heart rate up to its maximum. And you get a lot of, you know, it doesn't take long to train then, and so it's a really good way to be ready. And then it's just a matter of getting used to spending the time on the bike, but my body's fit and ready to go, sort of thing. So.
Yeah, body and mind and spirit. You mentioned a specific type of bike that needed to be specially built for your next expedition. Have you used, I don't know that much about cycling, but I do know there are different types of bikes. But what does that look like, and how do you know what you're going to need? You say you do a lot of research, so I'm sure that comes into it also, but how do you do that? How do you develop that, and how do you know that?
Well, I'm not a technically minded person, and to be honest, the first bikes that I used for my first 3 big expeditions and so on, I mean, they're just regular mountain bikes, really, and I make them as simple as possible, because I'm going to remote places where I can't, and I'm not a great mechanic either, so I just have to make sure that it's a good bike, good, solid, sturdy. Take anything that can break off it. I don't use suspension or anything like that on the mountain bike. I invest or have a sponsors for good working parts, so the drivetrain, like the pedals and the gears and the chains and cassettes and all of that stuff is kind of good quality, but we don't have to be paying for racing parts, because that's like a thoroughbred horse. You don't need a thoroughbred horse to go through where I'm going. So that's how it always was. And then when I was looking for Antarctica, you need to have a bike with very fat tires to have the flotation over the snow. And I guess I also had experience from cycling in a lot of sand, which is very similar to snow. For example, anyone like in Australia, when I did my Australian expedition, I went up the Canning Stock route. I mean, that's a huge thing. And like there's 1,000 sand dunes. And anyone who's done it since me has used the fat bike, i.e. with wider tires, and that changes the game. And so when I was starting to look for a bike for Antarctica, then obviously it's a no-brainer. You have to have the widest tires possible. But then I did a lot of research and I thought also, because I don't know anything about the extreme cold, there are other parts to that. So then you've got to seek people who have experience in those conditions. So that's when I actually started asking, and I did sort of looking for bike manufacturers and bike shops in the US, because obviously in the north, in the one I dealt with was in Maine, and they're dealing with cold conditions all the time. And what happens with the lubricants when they freeze? Because if you have in Antarctica, if I used a regular lubricant on the bike, I wouldn't be able to turn the pedals because it's frozen. You've actually got to. There's lots of special, and I was really scared that find all this money, all of this effort, and I got to Antarctica and my bike's useless because of one or two little things that I didn't know. Mm-hmm. So then I had to really find out. So I made friends with a particular bike shop in Maine, and then the other question was really about the bike itself, and I was talking with the very inventive owner of that bike shop, and 100 emails later, back and forth with different designs and things. And there's a fellow in Philadelphia who had made an all-wheel drive mountain bike. So there were other two-wheel drive things out there that just would not cut it, because I could see they're just not robust enough or strong enough for these extreme conditions. But this technology looked good. And I tracked Steve Christini down, and I sort of asked him, would he be able to put his technology into a fat bike? And you can't just retrofit it; it all had to be built from scratch, because it's the all-wheel drive system runs internally through the frame. You can actually see. Can you see that Amazing. Bike behind me with white? That's one of them. My house has got a lot of bikes in it. So he loved this idea that he'd be building me a bike for Antarctica, and he hadn't been making bicycles for a little while. He'd been making motorbikes with the same system that he had the patent for, but he loved this. So he made the first one, and I came from Australia via the US, and then across to Norway and up to Svalbard, which are 80 degrees, Norwegian islands 80 degrees north, and true polar conditions. And I was being taught by an Australian polar explorer who's probably just about the best guide in the world, Eric Phillips, and had a very good filmmaker and a photographer with us to get the images that we also need and the footage that we need, because we've also got to, if we're going to find big bucks, we need to have the highest quality content. And so that was the first test up there, and the bike was good, like it was worth pursuing. It wasn't, that was the first one though, that was the first prototype, and there were things that needed to improve, but it was from that we worked out that it's worth developing this. And then same with everything from the clothing, and it was properly cold up there. I'd never been in anything like it, and learning to exercise in the cold and how much harder it is, let alone trying to deal with the conditions, which they're varying with every pedal stroke. The conditions are varying. So what is the system that you use? So over time, I've become quite knowledgeable about the choices of equipment, because I've had to, because it's all about the function. And I guess that's probably, I'm not someone who needs to know, specifics, but I need to know that it's going to function and be reliable and be able to get me to the end.
Yeah, because it's basically you and the bike. Yeah,
and it needs to be simple, as simple as possible. And so I've got 4 of those fat bikes. So the second one I tested in northeast Greenland. No one's ever cycled up there before. That was amazing. That's actually the bike behind me, is the Greenland bike. And then the next one, it was still, we needed more tests. The next one was built
for 2017, and that was for Arctic Canada up in the Yukon, and up in, cycling over part of the Beaufort Sea. Part of the Beaufort Sea is pretty surreal, this stuff, because I think these bikes have actually opened, it's like opening a can of worms as well, because you can go to places that I didn't think was possible to cycle before. So that's where some of my really inventive recent expeditions have come from, because now, like, sand cycling as well, in particular, it's the same bike. That's my sand cycling bike now. It's been down the oldest river in the world in Australia, the Finke River. It's dry, but it's just cycling along the riverbed, for 500 odd kilometers. And then it made the first journey down Namibia's entire coastline over the Namib Desert so no one's ever done that before. It's like 1,600 kilometers, or just over 1,000 miles from Angola's border, so the mouth of the Kunene River, all the way to the mouth of the Orange River, which is the border with South Africa and Namibia. Wow. And more than half of that was no roads at all, and it's the wildest. It was a great test as well, and it's a brilliant story. I mean, we've made that into a feature film, and it's a TV series now as well. So that's being sold around the world, which is getting it out there. But it's just like, yes. So now each of these journeys I'm learning, and it's how we can sort of explore the land and create these different stories that have never been created before. So it's pulling all of those experiences together from the big ones, and now all altitude training as well. They're not just training, they're expeditions. So the one I did up in the Indian Himalaya in 2018 also. That was a humanitarian expedition as well. So it wasn't the world first or anything, but I teamed up with some Indian partners who we brought, sort of a group of us brought light and education through solar power to the most remote village in the Zanskar range. And then also, I was talking with kids in schools, and they were setting up these remote education platforms. So they can't get the internet up there. In many of these places, so they set up, so they have solar panels, they have a DC system, so they have the computers running off what's called Raspberry Pi, which means they can run off of the direct current from the solar panels, right. and then just because they don't have the internet, they just have this sort of hard drives with terabytes worth of resources on there. And it creates a Wi-Fi hotspot. So it's a bit like using the internet, without the World Wide Web. And so they were setting those up. So that was a very cool thing to do as well, which I've made a film about that too. So yeah.
Yeah. I'll include the links to all of these, the expeditions and your website and all of that. Anything that I have missed asking you, including, I don't know how much you can share of your next expedition, the one to the South Pole, how people can get involved if they want, or what they should be looking forward to when you're thinking or hoping to start, because I know with seasons and things like that will have an effect too.
That's right. So breaking the cycle South Pole, or any journey across Antarctica, can only ever happen in the Antarctic summer, so from mid-November, December and January. And so pretty much I've got most things ready, just needs a bit of fine tuning when I know. I mean, the whole issue is finding the right support, and that's what's stopping me going. To get what we can do education wise out of this will be amazing, and especially now that there's actually possible to do even some live streaming from the Antarctic plateau. That's only been possible in the last season or so.
Really?
So,
wow.
Yeah. So, I mean, my journey needs to be supported. There's absolutely no way that I'd ever be able to carry what I need, everything that I need for that kind of distance. So the distance, if I can go from ocean to ocean, that's actually almost around about 3,000 kilometers. If I just go over the land and not the ice shelves, then it's about 1,800 kilometers. Either way, it needs to be supported, which is why it's expensive. But I'm doing a lot of, all the time, I'm trying to find ways in, because the amount I need is so much more. 10 or 20 or 50, even 50,000 isn't going to get me very far. So normally I can get those kind of amounts for the other journeys that I do, or 10s and 20s and 5s. But that's okay to top up at the end. This is, we need many hundreds of thousands. So we just need to be able to, it's really good for a tech company, an education company. It's really good for there's insurance, or there's lots of areas. So I guess the one way in particular that if anyone has any particular connections or ideas or suggestions, that would be pretty helpful. I've still got also expeditions that have been on hold thanks to the pandemic. The last one I've been doing a journey on every other continent. That's also preparatory for Antarctica. So the sand and the altitude cycling and the polar, and there's one of those left in the Andes, which I managed to do 1,100 kilometers. It's from Cusco in Peru, and it's basically going through Bolivia, through little bits of Chile. I'm following the line of the volcanoes and actually cycling up some of them.
Wow.
And I've got 7 weeks of that journey to go to finish that. So that's what I'm hoping to do in the window is February, March, April this year, which looks like I might be able to travel now. So that's a
yes,
good.
Hopefully.
Yes. So that's also what I'm setting up, and I'm working with I'm working with different schools. I'm actually in the midst of doing a series of lectures for Education in Motion, which is just the rebranded name for Dulwich College International, the international schools. So Dulwich College in London is like a 400-year-old school, so one of the earliest schools in London, still going, and the most famous alumni of Dulwich College in London was Sir Ernest Shackleton. And
oh wow!
So these international schools were started about 20 years ago, and in mostly China, but also Singapore and Korea. And there's actually 13 of them now. Dulwich, and there's some Chinese schools as well as a part of that group. They're growing really fast, but they all, as part of what they do as a group, they call it the Shackleton Lectures, and every year they ask someone to do that. And this year it's my turn, so I've got 22 lectures in total. I've done 16 of them now. I've got another one tomorrow, and the next day, and the day after. So so I'm hoping to get those. There's about 11,000 students there.
Nice.
We want to get them involved, but I think for your listeners, imagining once we get this thing going is just what we can do collectively to get maximal participation. I'll have some educators helping me with some very good resources as well. So it'll be much more. But the trouble is that it all costs money to even produce resources. Costs money, and that's where it's like I'm going to set up my own foundation. That's part of it as well, Breaking the Cycle Foundation, and that's really going to be about teaching, helping develop, the next generation of leaders. And it's about education for leadership, and the idea. I've met so many great initiatives and projects and organizations in my journeys, in particular in Africa, and I've felt so helpless because I've never been able to help them. And I think that the idea with my foundation will be to have some leadership education, and then the opportunity for some of those young leaders to visit some of the projects. I'll be making a contribution to those projects, and then they'll spend some time like getting first-hand experience.
Like internships. Well, I think there's so much of the storytelling that you're able to do, And so it's not like you're not doing it. I know you mean it in a way that, you really haven't developed or helped in terms of them being able to get out of poverty or improving their education, but just the attention that's being able to be paid to, and the knowledge that the rest of the world gets about the places that you're going into, and and the people that you're meeting and all of that, I think is just invaluable. It's just so valuable. Really, it is. Kate, this has been fantastic. But where can people find you? What are the best places to locate you if they want to hop off the podcast and look for you? And all of this information and all of your links I will be sure to have in my show notes.
Thank you very much. My website is actually, I have two web addresses. They go to the same point, to the same place. The easy one to remember is kateleeming.com.
Okay.
The other one is breakingthecycle.education. And they both go to the same place.
Okay.
So you can pick up, you can get links to watch the Lights of Ladakh and films, and you can have a look at all of the expeditions. You can get links to my Beluga channel. So that's a good place to start. I mean, you can find me easily enough on all the social media.
Yeah.
Really
I think it's on Twitter, it's Leeming_Kate.
Yeah, and Instagram's the same.
Okay, good.
Facebook, Kate M. Leeming. There's more than one Kate Leeming in the world, believe it or not.
Oh,
so we have to.
that happens.
Yeah. So yes. What else? LinkedIn, very easy to find me under my name. Yeah. And I'm always interested to hear people's ideas, or if someone wants to help with, producing some content, or I can help them, or whatever, So
yes, I'll be sure to tag those educators who I know are very, very involved in the Sustainable Development Goals, and also in global collaboration, and just exposing their students all around the world to expeditions and adventures, and finding out what's out there. So absolutely, I will make sure you will have a long list of links in your show notes. Kate, this has been wonderful, and I'm so happy to reconnect with you after all this time. I wish you the best of luck in the expeditions that, keeping my fingers crossed, get going next year. And like Kate said, if anybody has any connections, to reach out to her and let her know.
Thank you so much. And I mean, there's a couple of books as well, actually, on my website, but they're hard for me to get them to you. You can get them if you're in the US, UK, or Europe, or Australia. It's a little bit harder to get them further afield, given the systems we have at the moment.
Okay, and they are on your website?
Yep.
Perfect.
There's Out There and Back, which is about the Australian expedition, and there's Njinga, which is about the big African expedition, not the Namibian expedition.
Perfect. Oh, I'm sure there are people who'll be looking for those. So thanks again, Kate. This has been wonderful.
Thanks, Elaine. Nice to actually chat with you face to face. I think we haven't done that yet.
Yes.
I'll get to wait one day.
I'm hoping, or I'll get to, Melbourne. Let's see.
Yeah, very good. All right. Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.